need to be in touch with your body to listen at me. So please do whatever you need to do, stretch yourself in order to be able to breathe better and listen at me. Okay, thank you. You can see how things that I will say are very, very much in line with what jakožto said. You might say that in our society, the intersubjective or dialogical or contact maybe are epistemological ciphers, are important epistemological concepts. And I start from a premise: there are not approaches in psychotherapy which are better than others. But in order to be a psychotherapist, we need to live in epistemology, to be rooted in epistemology. And this allows us to dialogue with the others. So I think that each approach has a special flavor, special attraction to students. So you choose what kind of psychotherapist you want to be, what kind of method you want to follow, according to the vibration that you feel to each approach. And I also want to share a feeling that I have being here since last night. My visit to Brno will be very quick because I will go away this afternoon. I'm sorry that it's so short, but I have to teach in Milan tomorrow. But I have a strong feeling being here. I feel like in the middle of Europe, in a flow. My feeling is that here there are a lot of diversities, a lot of polarities, like communist and anti-communist, or religious and anti-religious, maybe psychoanalyst and behaviorist. So I feel that you have this special opportunity in life to be in the flow. In Italy we are different. I feel that in my country we are much more isolated. Isolate us. So we don't know much of the best. And I think that your being in the middle of the flow makes you very modern. Because we speak of the liquid society today, where all the people are exposed to many stimulus. And the need of today, the lack, what we miss today, what the young people miss today, is a sort of containment of their emotions. So I think you live in this opportunity. You can feel what being the flow is, and you can learn a lot from being in the uncertainty, and at the same time learn how to feel rooted and how to give to your clients this feeling of containment and rootedness. Now I want to tell you something about the specific language of Gestalt therapy, specific concepts. And my speech will be in two parts. First I want to speak to you of this concept in Gestalt therapy, and then I want to make a reflection about the challenge that psychotherapy is going through today, in line with the development of society. So how the development of society is influencing psychotherapy. How do we have to change as psychotherapists according to the development of society? Because our clients today are very different from the clients of 10 years ago or 20 concepts of Gestalt therapy. These are the main concepts. We might say it in a different way. So this is my way, the way I chose to speak to you of Gestalt therapy today. One is the paradigm of the co-created betweenness, very similar to what Jakožto said before. We speak of the betweenness, so we look at what happens between the client and the therapist, the between. And we believe that the self is co-created, and they co-create a contact. And there is where the psychotherapy happens. Another concept is the unitary nature of the organism-environment field. When we speak of field, we speak of phenomenological field. We are phenomenological psychotherapists, so we start from the experience, what we are experiencing here and now. This is our phenomenological field. And we speak of the organism-environment field, like a unitary nature, where little by little, the tension to contact of each one pole creates differences. And these differences are called contact boundaries. And I will approach all these aspects with little clinical examples for each one. Another concept is the aesthetic values. And then the figure-ground dynamic. And then the concept of psychopathology as creative adjustment. So this is an overview of the concept. You have a flyer of my book where you can read all that I will tell you is in this book, which is in English. And you have the flyer where you can read something and also you can read the table of contents. The book approaches the contribution of psychotherapy in contemporary society, a new understanding of aggression, the concept of phenomenological field, a redefinition of love in psychotherapy, which goes with the Oedipus concept, and the passing from a dyadic to a triadic perspective, overcoming the Oedipal epistemology. This is a little bit what Jakožto was approaching also, the capacity of the human being to stay not only in a dyadic contact, but to be in a polyphonic environment, to be in a complex relational setting. And then the support of what they call the now for next, you will see what the now for next, the attention to the future in couple, family, and groups. This is what, just to give you a background of what I wrote in the book. And now I want to start with a little vignette, clinical vignette. The first concept is the paradigm of the co-created betweenness. The client says to the therapist, I had a little dream last night. And the therapist answers, yes, little like I am. This is a crazy thing. You think it's a crazy thing. I will tell you why it's not crazy. Or at least it's a good craziness. The therapist is little. I mean, short, like me. And the client had a little dream. And the therapist says, yes, you had a little dream, like I am, little. The little dream declines with realistic data and intentionality of contact. The patient chooses the specific words in order to reach that particular therapist. And in doing so, he takes the risk to overcoming habitual relational blocks. So the idea is that in the previous session, the client noticed that the therapist is short. But he didn't say anything because it's not fair. Then he made this dream. He made a normal dream. And when he went to the next session, he had many possibilities to tell the therapist his dream. and we chose to tell the dream saying, I had a little dream. So this word little, for us, belongs to a phenomenological field. And it includes a wish to say something, to undo a retroflexion, to say something that the client could not say before, because it's not fair. So in that very moment, the client is offering the therapist a way to overcome a retroflexion, a way of being freer. When the therapist says, yes, little like I am, he is helping the person to dissolve a frozen intentionality of contact and to reach and be reached by the therapist. It's not interpretative, because we might say this is an interpretation. Of course, it's also an interpretation, but we don't use it in the sense of an interpretation, because we do not think that the client is avoiding part of himself in the relationship. We are not thinking that the client is avoiding something. The therapeutic intervention is focused on supporting the intentionality of contact, which had previously been retroflected and which now recovers vitality, to help the person to feel that he is seen, recognized by the therapist at last. So the basis of interpretation is that the client is missing a part. So I tell you what they are not conscious of. In this case, it's not interpretation, because the support is to the intentionality of the client to reach the therapist with a previously frozen intentionality. Somehow it's very similar to the dialogical aspect that Jakob was saying before, but it's more specific. Giving a more specific glance. The second aspect is the unitary nature of organism environment field, tension to contact, and the formation of the contact boundary. The client's feeling is grasped in its tension towards the significant other in the here and now, and the therapist's feeling is used as word of the life of the patient, as continuous environment which reacts to the patient and is in its turn enacted by her or him. The expression word of the life is a phenomenological expression. In phenomenology, Husserl speaks of the word of the life of the client. The therapist, in a phenomenological field perspective, the therapist is the word of the life of the client. Is not a neutral person, but is deeply part of the experience of the client. So the therapist is one that reacts to the client's experience. And this is correct for us. We don't want a neutral meeting. We want a live meeting where the reaction of the therapist can be a healing reaction, not a neutral reaction. This movement creates differences. I mean, when the client expresses himself and the therapist reacts like the word of the life of the client, there creates differences in perception, and therefore originates the contact boundary. If we are at the beginning of a session, the client smells the therapist. Now, let's see how the therapist is today, if he's angry or he's happy. And the therapist also smiles the client. Let's see how the client is today. Then they start to speak, and the client first says, I had a little drink. And the therapist says, yes, little like I can. Then it's an immediate meeting. And the contact boundary is made of the possibility for the client to be recognized by the therapist. So it's a very positive contact boundary. If the the reaction is different. I mean, you can have thousands of possibilities of creation of contact boundary. The sense is that the contact boundary is made of the differences in perception between the client and the therapist. And without differences, we do not grow. So it's basic that the client and the therapist perceive differences in the way they had thought their meeting would have been. Treatment, for us, does not consist in analysis, but in the relational recognition of that intentionality of contact that had been blocked. The concept of the contact boundary actualizes the idea of focusing on the phenomenic world, which is never inside, but always at the surface of senses. Also, Jakob before me was speaking of physiology and senses. We agree on that. Senses or consciousness adhere to the academic phenomenology of Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology was the academic current of phenomenology. No? They started from senses in their studies. And it's also this being focused on senses is also linked to the pragmatic root of Gestalt therapy, to its American soul, the American pragmatism, which privileges the social aspects of human interaction. The boundary is co-created on the basis of the experience in continual and mutual regulation that the one has of the other. This development of Gestalt therapy is very close to last developments in psychoanalysis, in particular the studies of Donna Orange, Fried Orange and Orange Action, Stoller, and of Daniel Stern. I personally am very close to Daniel Stern. I consider him a master of mine, and he was also my friend. In Italy, I had invited him for 9 years in my school, and we were very much friends. He died last November. And we are doing many conferences on him. I wrote articles on him. And he is very close to Gestalt therapy. He started his theory from inside psychoanalysis. So his main concept was to change psychoanalysis. And I think he did a wonderful job for all psychotherapists, because he brought us to the concept of the spontaneity in contact making, the mutual regulation. Now we go to another concept, the aesthetic values. Interest in the mentalization of the experience is decidedly replaced by interest in the experience generated by the concrete nature of senses. So it's very different to stay as a therapist in the session, in the setting, considering to mentalize what the client is saying, or staying in a setting with the body, with the senses. The concept of excitement is for us a physiological equivalent of the phenomenological concept of intentionality. So what we stay in the contact with the therapist, experiencing our own body and experiencing the client's body for as far as we can, with our senses. And we look at the intentionality, the tension to contact of the client. So that this physiological excitement to contact, this energy to contact, is for us the equivalent of intentionality in phenomenology. The concept of awareness, which is different from consciousness, expresses being present to the senses in the process of contacting the environment, identifying oneself in a spontaneous and harmonious manner with the intentionality of contact. Awareness is not consciousness. To be aware means to be in contact with senses. So a dancer is aware if he or she dances in an harmonic way. the client is aware when he is spontaneous with us. The same thing for the therapist. When the client comes to us and he is desensitized because the anxiety is too high, so he doesn't look at us, he doesn't see us. In that case, we say he's not aware. Awareness is a quality of contact and it represents its normality. The normal contact for us is the contact that a child has with his environment, very spontaneous. And neurosis, in contrast, is the maintenance of isolation in the organism environment field through an exaggeration of the function of consciousness. So it's when there is a missing of spontaneity on account of anxiety, perceived anxiety, that we forget our senses and we become too much in our mind, subconscious. In psychosis, the anxiety is so high that the desensitization is very, very pervasive. So the psychotic person comes to you and he is already in his projections. He sees that a picture, you have moved a picture in your office, and he says, he thinks that you have moved the picture on account of him because he was angry the last time. So you have moved the picture on account of him. So his perception is very much in line with his anxiety more than with the concreteness of senses. Another concept is the figure ground dynamic. So this means that we stay in the setting with a question. As therapists, we stay in the setting with a question. How do I contribute to the patient's experience at this moment? From what ground of the experience of the therapeutic contact does the figure that the patient is creating emerge? So we consider ourselves like part of the ground of the experience, from which the figure that the client brings emerge. It's not in the sense of taking responsibility, like the client is angered, and the therapist wonders, how did I contribute to this anger? But it's not in terms of taking responsibility. I take my own responsibility, like a humanistic concept. It's not that. It's how, in this moment, at the contact boundary, I am contributing to the schema, to the relational schema. So how do I maintain the aggression of the client? It's a matter of dancing together, another thing that has been said before. It's a matter of dancing together. When the client dances with us, with his or her aggression, how do we dance in his aggression? So, for instance, the client says, last night I dreamt about a wall. It was in front of me, unsurmountable. I could see neither the beginning nor the end of it. I woke up with a feeling of not being able to go ahead. I didn't know where else to go. Do you see? From what experiential, so the therapist wonders, from what experiential ground does the figure of the wall emerge? And further, still more importantly, what intentionality of contact determines the formation of this figure? So, in terms of figure ground, the therapist wonders, what is the ground of the experience of the client? And what is the intentionality for contact that is behind this telling of the dream? So the therapist asks, how was I an unsurmountable wall for you at the previous session? It's not interpretative, it's more metaphorical than interpretative. And of course, the client wonders, you, the wall, are you crazy? And the therapist says, concentrate on the experience of the wall. So use your senses to concentrate on the experience of the wall in your dream. Be in your dream, concentrate on the experience of the wall. And think about our last session. So open your senses when you remember our last session. Do you think there is some similarity? And the client answers. It was when I felt moved in front of you. At that moment, I would have liked to embrace you. You were impassive. I felt the way I did in front of my father when I was little. I was never able to tell him if I had a problem or if I was happy. All my attempts to reach him were aborted by his severity. His great look was like a bolt or lightning that nailed me down. I felt off balance with you. I didn't know where to go at the moment. Maybe it's no use hoping to be spontaneous. So of course now I shorten the dialogue between client and therapist. It was longer, but these are the essential passages. And the therapist says, so I was a wall for you when I didn't accept your emotion. Thank you for giving me the opportunity not to be that way now. Try to tell me what you didn't tell me about your emotion at the last session. I'm listening. I'm a bit ashamed. It's something new for me. This is important because when the client releases the retroflected emotion, the first feeling is the anxiety. So perceived as embarrassment or shame. Take a breath. So the therapist is supporting the physiological resilience of the client. Take a breath. Look at me, so use your senses, and when you're ready, tell me as you breathe out, so in your exhaling, about your emotion and listening. The therapist gives the support to the client to speak out the emotions. And the patient takes a deep breath, looks at the therapist, and manages to say, "You are important for me. I like your patience. The warmth I intuitively feel in you when I look at you. Thank you for being here with me." So the intentionality of contact is completed. What the client wanted to say to the therapist is done. And the therapist asks, how is it going now? And the client, fine. I feel I've done what I wanted. I feel light. And I know where I want to go. It was important for me to tell you that. The figure brought by the patient, the unsurmountable wall, is an emergent property of the figure-ground dynamic that animates the therapeutic contact. Following this map, the therapist will retrace the patient's intentionality of contact and to support it so that it might be developed in the contact between them. Now the last point of this first part is psychopathology as creative adjustment. Are you still alive? Yes? Can I continue? For us, the knowledge about psychopathology is an embodied knowledge. Intention to contact and aesthetic, rooted in the unitary nature of organism environment. And this is what does most justice of our approach. So we feel in an embodied way the experience of being in contact with the client. And we believe that the contact, both of the therapist and of the client, is intention to contact. So anything the client says or does is understood like intention to contact. And we look at the aesthetic of the meeting. We look at how the client moves, the anatomy. We look at what vibrates inside us. That is the important point, how it vibrates for us in the contact meeting. And yes, in the world of phenomenology, knowledge does not exclude intuition, in that it emerges from perception, like Merleau-Ponty pointed out. And since perception is based on the senses, it's strictly linked to aesthetic judgment. Defense, which in psychodynamic perspective has traditionally been seen in its impedimental aspect to the therapeutic process, in the Gestalt approach is seen in contrast as a relational ability based on a process of creative adjustment to be supported. So when the client defenses him or herself, this is good for us. It's his ability for contact. It's something he's communicated to us. So he's using his creative adjustment to us. And this permits psychotherapy to move from an extrinsic model of health to an aesthetic model based on the current perception of the encounter between therapist and patient, so on factors intrinsic to the relationship. For us, diagnosis is an intrinsic to relation act of the therapist. We can even use the DSM-4, it's okay, or 5 now, it's out, DSM-5. So we can use the DSM, but we have to feel it in our body. So for us, the diagnosis comes from the contact making in an aesthetic way. It's what we feel and what the client feels that creates the diagnosis. There is a book about Gestalt therapy, psychopathology, that Jan Duval has edited together with Gianni Franceschetti and Michela Cecil. The whole book is based on this kind of psychopathology, or concept of psychopathology. So Gestalt diagnosis focuses on the modality of contact with which a person avoids the anxiety of the excitement of contact and makes it possible to identify the type of contact on which a therapeutic relationship will be staged. Hence, the clinical problem that is posed to the Gestalt therapist is in line with phenomenological research, with Gestalt psychology, with the American pragmatism, which also roots the experience in sensation and in co-creative equilibrium. The Gestalt therapist does not intend to bring the patient to a healthy or mature standard of experience or behavior, but to lead her or him to reappropriate spontaneity in making contact, to reacquire the fullness of awareness being there in the contact. So we do not think in terms of maturity. They are not stages that the client has to fulfill, to which there is the spontaneity of contact. I don't have time to deep this point, but I understand that now you're thinking about psychosis. What is the spontaneity of psychosis? The psychotic behavior is not spontaneous. It's anxiety. It's full of anxiety. So we do not consider that spontaneity. It's not the crazy person is not a happy person. But I stop here for this point. If you want, you can put questions. Otherwise, I'm not able to continue with the society aspect. Also, in the recent theories of Daniel Stern, Forms of Vitality, his last book, he considers the movement of the person like the basic unit of perception. The baby perceives the movement and movements in a gestalt, in a whole figure. I divided the development of psychotherapy in society since the 50s to nowadays in 3 decades. The first decade is what has been called the narcissistic society from 1950 to 1970s. The client say different things in those ages, and psychotherapy responded peculiar way that I don't tell you now because I don't have time. Then the other 20 years have been called borderline society or technological society. Clients say particular things. Individuals, family, couples say different things, ask for different things. And the psychotherapist answer was of a certain kind. Then there is the last 20 years, which is called the liquid society, like Down would say. And in the liquid society, the feeling of the client is very liquid, like they can go everywhere with the globalization of communication, but they don't have a containing relationship. They cannot feel rooted. They cannot feel they belong to someone or to something. So, what is the challenge for psychotherapy today? There are many questions. Is the traditional setting of psychotherapy still good today? Can we treat the disease of today, which is made of great anxiety? Can we treat the disease today in a room, in a therapy room, once a week, or twice or 3 times a week? Or we need something else? I think that today, the social denial of society, the denial of society is for the need of rootedness. I think that today society is denying the need of society to feel rooted. While 40 years ago, society was denying the need for aggression, to be aggressive. Today, people need to be rooted, and society is denying this. So Western society has moved from the denial of aggressiveness to the denial of the need of rootedness. Today, children grow up adjusting to the absence of caregivers, developing anxiety towards the containment of their emotions, and accustomed to not sharing their emotions. And society shows itself to be increasingly demanding and falsely nurturing. They demand a lot to young people, but it's not nurturing. Young people have to find their way without a clear perception of where they're going, of the balance between themselves and the environment, and they have to do this quickly. Patients today suffer from disorders that have to do with the lack of the ground of taken for granted experiences, panic attacks, and so on. Their experience is characterized by a lack of relational support and consequently a lack of self-support. In short, if 50 years ago society showed insensitivity to individuals' need for differentiation and rebellion against pre-established authority, today it shows insensitivity towards individuals' need for rootedness. And so the challenge for psychotherapy models today is to support the physiological process of contact. Breathe and stay in the boundary. The therapeutic relationship, like any other, must face up to this sense of emergency by containing the chaos that characterizes the beginning of every experience. Go down. For example, at school, support the containment of body feelings. In psychotherapy settings, find the interest which comes from senses, the energy which comes from the being and the body in contact. In families, support caregivers to have physiological processes don't fall in the provocation of the battle among egos. And support group level. The hero today is the group, the harmonic self-regulating process which comes from being in horizons of reality where mutual support and breathing is possible.